I ran around the edge, and Melvin bites on the play action. His first day, he's still getting his legs under him. And this moron who loves contact, I caught him with my helmet underneath his, and I knocked him on his can. Coach Brazier over on the side starts yelling, Melvin Foster, what are you doing? And then the next words out of his mouth was, now run it again. And Melvin just looks at me and goes, yeah, let's run that one again. And I was like, oh, that was a huge mistake. And so we ran it again. I got my just desserts for doing that. And he's like, don't ever do that again. I said, no, sir, no worries. It will not happen again. One of those moments you're like, oh, that was a lesson learned real fast. Know your audience, know where you're at. Don't knock the All-American on his ass if he's not looking, that sort of thing.
Welcome to the Gallery and Hurley Unfiltered podcast, Iowa Football Rewind.
Subscribe now on YouTube or your favorite podcast player to get a behind-the-scenes look that you won't find anywhere else.
This episode, we are excited to have Shawn Gillen, offensive lineman from 1989 to 1991. Shawn, welcome.
Hey, thank you very much.
Welcome,
It's great
Shawn.
to be here. It's an honor. Thank you, guys.
Let's start out in Illinois, where you grew up.
I grew up on a farm in West Central Illinois, Monmouth, Illinois, the home of Monmouth College and the birthplace of Wyatt Earp. And my high school was just outside of town, Yorkwood, a little tiny place. I had 27 kids in my class. And one of the when I reflect back on how I wound up at Iowa, and it was a tiny high school. We weren't that great of a team. We had some success, but I had a desire to go to that higher level. I wanted to play Division I level school. And there was one school that was contacting me on a regular basis, and that was Iowa. I started getting letters from Coach Fry, and I think my sophomore year in high school. And I was like, okay, maybe there's a shot here to get to that level. It was really something I needed to prove to myself that I could compete at that level. So it was a lot of work and put it in, and I had the opportunity. My parents really wanted me to go to a Catholic school like St. Thomas. I was Division III, but we went and we visited Iowa, and they spent about a half an hour with Coach Ferentz, who was the offensive line coach at the time. That's how old I am. And after that visit, we walked out of the office and they're like, okay, they signed off. This is a good place for you. I was impressed what did he say to him? And they were so impressed with him as an individual and Coach Fry as people and what they would do for me. That cleared the path for me to go. So that was it. Off to Iowa City.
20-some kids in your class. Wow, I'm impressed. I had 64 and I thought that was small. we
had a county of we had 4 or 5 high school districts. My school doesn't exist anymore. It got consolidated, and I think there's 2 high schools in the county now. So it went by the wayside.
And take us back as far as like your mindset at that point and kind of the people that were helping you get to the level that you wanted to get to. Was it your parents? Was it a coach? Like, talk about that some, if you would.
I had numerous coaches throughout high school. There was like a turning door, but my freshman year was Coach Steve Graves, who went on to coach at different levels in the state of Illinois. And his father-in-law was Bill Reichow. Now, Bill was a Hawkeye. He was a lineman from the 1957 Rose Bowl team, former Marine. His brother was Jerry Reichow, who is a legend with the Vikings organization and was a quarterback at Iowa back during the Forrest Evashevsky days. And they were in my hometown, and they were really encouraging. And we talked a lot about Iowa and what I could, once I got my desire, that's where I wanted to go. We had a lot of talks about what it would take to be successful. And there was a lot of doubt too, coming out of this little school, a lot of that imposter syndrome that you hear about. And it was like, what are they doing with me? I'm just this country kid from Yorkwood. And so they were encouraging because I think they saw I had the physical capabilities and knew I could compete at that level, even though I was doubting myself. It was funny when we got there. I think my wife or somebody was asking me, did you ever aspire to go to that next level? You were there. And I know you had some injuries and stuff, but did you ever think about, or is that what you really wanted to do, was go play in the NFL? It's like there was maybe a spark of that for a few minutes. And then Mike Wells walked through the door our freshman year. And you all know Mike Wells. He was a nose tackle for the Chicago Bears. He walked in our freshman year, and I'm sitting there. I'm a big guy, and Wellesley comes through the door, and you're like, ah, okay, those are the guys. Because they just got this, there's something else about them. They're just genetically one level up. And when talking to Mike, he had his own doubts. And none of us really knew what the future was going to hold. I wish we were able to share that with each other, because I think it would have encouraged us to encourage each other on, because we just looked at him and like, this guy's going to play on Sundays. And he was having his own doubts at the time, but then they get you in, they start to build your confidence in that first week where it's just a freshman, and they bring you in and they start to let you learn the system and get you oriented, learn where the bathrooms are, so you don't feel so stupid when the upperclassmen come in.
So tell me a little bit about, you must have done pretty well to get some recognition, or do you think someone tipped off Iowa to your potential there, or was it someone else, do you think?
Yeah,
or did you get all-state honors or something that got attention?
Not really. I think we were 4-6 my senior year or something like that. Didn't make the playoffs, and I was 6'3", 275 maybe as a senior, and I had played varsity all 4 years. Uh, I was 6'3", 235 coming in as a freshman in high school, and they just threw me in there. My brother was a senior, and he would just say, "Go hit that guy," and that sort of thing. And I think I might have been Coach Reichow, but I'm not sure. They never told me, but I suspect maybe they made a call. Hey, you may want to check this kid out. Just started getting noticed a lot by, of course, the smaller schools and NAIA and that whole spiel. There was no internet back then, no website where you upload your videos and stuff like that. You had to create your own VCR tape. If you had a dual deck recorder of really crappy game film that was filmed from the side, and create that and send off to the schools. That was interesting, but hopefully they were sending scouts to some of the games and things like that. Maybe they came to some games. I'm not sure. But must have been doing something.
With that few kids in your class, you probably had to play some of those games, right?
Had to play. I never left the field. I was one of those things. We were on every special team as long snapper for the punts and field goals. We didn't kick a lot of field goals, but if you get a kicker that could make a field goal, it was a miracle from all the teams that we played. Then kickoff return, everything. So you never left the field until halftime. Then you go back on and you're in there and you just flip back and forth, offense, defense. And I played everything from defensive end to nose tackle. It just depended on what defense we had. When I was a freshman, we played something called a split six, which you guys have probably never heard of, but it would just basically put all your big fat guys up front and just run people over. You had 6 down linemen and 2 middle linebackers and very few defensive back, because there wasn't a quarterback that could throw in the whole league.
Let's jump into the recruiting process. So Coach Ferentz was one who recruited you as well?
Yeah, and he would be in contact, and it was one of those things where we had to go visit, and he said, "Do you think I can compete here?" And he said, "Absolutely." He was very encouraging. And, you guys know the type of guy that he is. By the time he got done talking to you, it was like I was unstoppable. But he wasn't going to blow smoke out your butt. He was going to tell you the truth. That was encouraging. And they brought me in as a preferred walk-on, and I thought it was an honor. I went there on a mission to prove to myself that I could compete at the Division I level, and that was the ultimate goal for my time there. This is what I wanted. Anything else would be icing on the cake. If I got into the first and second strings and all that sort of stuff, that would be great. But I'm just happy to be here, going to do what I got to do to compete at this level. And so with the ultimate goal of getting on the field on a Saturday. It was a moment that was great.
It's such a dynamic time, I think, when you're that young, you have someone who believes in you like that. And I'm sure it's great for those coaches to watch, right? Yeah. Especially at Iowa, where they develop guys and they find these nuggets that can be relatively unknown at times. And then see them work and develop into some big time players and contributors, all different parts of it. Just has to be great for them to watch and see that kind of seed that they planted and push that along.
Yeah. Then what Ferentz left, went to the University of Maine after the 89 season. And they hired John O'Hara as the offensive line coach. And so you had a new guy coming in. So it was like, oh boy, Ferentz thought I could be a contributor in my red shirt year. So now second year rolls around and O'Hara's there and you're like, oh boy, now I got to reprove myself all again. And so what was really cool was I got in at the early part of the 1990 season, and this is the highlight for me of my career. The Des Moines Register listed me as the #2 offensive center right behind Mike Devlin. In my mind, I was like, hey, that was pretty darn good. But I did think back, well, we had 3 or 4 all Big Tens, and Mike was a consensus All-American, was on the Bob Hope show and everything. And these guys were pretty damn good. And so it was quite an honor to be listed in there. And then about mid-season that year, I got injured. So it was rough. That was the first time I got some playing time that early part of the season. So that was really cool.
What year was that?
90, the Rose Bowl year.
90. Yeah. Okay. And then did you play center in high school or did you have to learn that?
A little bit. I played a
Okay.
little bit of center. That meant nothing because it was a different ball game at this level. And that was what you're sitting here next to Devlin and you're trying to, how smart he was. He had a mind for the game that was just unreal. He saw the entire defensive backfield and he knew where the fronts were. And he had to get the call in the huddle. And then he had to make the offensive line calls at the line. And so I was trying to learn all of that. And that was a challenge. But then the defense would shift. And he had about a half a second to recall everything and get it shouted down the line and that sort of thing. So it became obvious to me really quick that this was less of a physical game or physical challenge anymore for me as it was a mental challenge. That you had to learn how to keep your mind in the game and keep your poise. As Coach Fry used to say, when the bullets are flying, you got to keep your head. So everybody does their own version of Coach Fry, and so you just got mine. That's as good as it gets. But that was one of the things when I reflect back on it, that time period was really formative in a sense of what I had to use in the future when things got really serious. So when things got heated, you really had to stay focused and you really had to stay on and remember what you learned and fall back on your training. So it meant you had to practice things, you had to think it through. That was an interesting time period. It was a transition for me where in high school, I didn't play against a lot of guys that were large. And so I would just dominate physically when I had to. There were guys who could outthink me in the game and would hand you your lunch all night long just because they were better coached, or they were faster, or just a better technique. But physically, I could always dominate. And that wasn't the case anymore. So I had to up my mental game and had to up my focus and poise. And that was something I think Coach Ferentz he used that word a lot, poise. Stay cool and under the heat.
Just clarifying on the years a little bit. So did you have 1 year with Ferentz where you redshirted and then he left and then you got O'Hara and then that was that 90 season and you got hurt. And then how did that season end up?
I didn't get back until spring ball and I clawed my way back again. And I would break into the #2s a lot. As I tell people, I was a second stringer on my best day. And that's okay. I wouldn't change a thing. It was learning. I was growing up during that time period. And emotionally and mature wise, I was not ready for college. I could have used a few years to kind of learn the things of the real world, but despite my best efforts, I graduated. In that time period early on, it was a challenge to balance that. I also wanted to have a social life, but you had classes and all that sort of thing. Ferentz left in 90, then I had to prove myself again in 90, and then I got hurt. And then 91 rolls around. The same thing, you had to claw your way back into it and justify your existence there. And try to compete for a scholarship down the road and that sort of thing. And I was always on the hook. It was like, yeah, you're in the mix. And then in 91, Farron O'Hare was there again in 91, and I broke my wrist in preseason practices. It was a little tiny bonus. So here's what happens when you miss a block and John Derby is blitzing, and you reach out and you grab his face mask and they hand the ball off to Lou Montgomery. Here's what's going to happen is Lou's going to put his head down and he's going to try to run over John, and John's going to try to run over him, and your hand's in the way. So that was a lesson I learned real quick. Don't do that. And it got smashed up and broken real bad. It was like, oh man, what the hell? I say, here we go again. And so it was a matter of, I had a cast then up to my shoulder at that point. Had to learn to write with my left hand to take notes in class and all this kind of stuff with my right arm. It wasn't that serious of an injury, but had to get it healed. And I got back later on in the season. They were able to put a playing cast on for a while, and then had to claw your way back. And then, and you guys remember this or not, but that following January was when Coach O'Hara passed away. He was on cruise. I think the Coach Fry used to take all the coaches cruise. Yeah, and then people would pay to go and hang out with the coaches. And I was working. Do you guys remember when I used to work the door at the field house, checked IDs and that sort of stuff? And that was my part-time job. And a guy named Mark Eggleston owned the place. And the guy with the eye patch. Yeah. Okay. Hopefully you didn't hang out enough to know that off the top of your mouth. But yeah, he was a good guy. But Mark was on the cruise, and he called the field house that night, got me on the phone. And I think I was probably the first guy in Iowa City to find out that Coach O'Hara had passed away. So I told the managers, hey, I got to go. And I think it was about 11 o'clock at night. I can't remember. It's too long ago. And I immediately went home and started trying to track down the guys like Devlin and Davis and Mike Ferroni and those guys who were they were the starter. They were Coach O'Hara's guys. And I don't remember where they were. So that was just what I did that night. I was like, hey, you guys need to come home. Yeah, there's been something's happened. And that was rough. That was a real rough year because you learn to love the guy like a dad. And all of a sudden, bam, it's gone. And on campus, that's the guy you do anything for, anybody's position coach. And he was really great. I just felt lucky to have been a part of that program when he was there, because he really developed us into men and was really about doing things right all the time, getting there on time, showing up, putting time in the weight room, putting time in the classroom. And so that was really a bad springtime. And then spring ball came around after that. And here we go again. I have a theory about why this kept happening. We were in spring ball and everything was healed and it was good. Oh, Coach Verducci was there. He was now the offensive line coach. Somebody missed a block or something, and my ankle got rolled on, and every ligament in my ankle just blew right out. Everything but the Achilles tendon. I was like, golly, what is happening? I gritted my teeth. They ran you through an obstacle to see if you're ready to come back. I was like, this is my last shot. Any playing time whatsoever. I really got to get back in here. So I faked my way through their zigzag runs and making sure you could go back and forward and everything like that, and got them to let me back in to play by the time the spring game rolled around, and played in the spring game that year. And I think I heard it again in the spring game or something. It's like, so my theory is this: when you come to the Big Ten, everybody's the biggest and the strongest in the world. And I enjoyed the violence of the game. I enjoyed the contact of the game. And I think that I didn't have to feel the consequences of that until you get into, and everybody is the size of Mike Wells that you're hitting. And that tends to wear on the body. So at that point in my career was, okay, gods, you're trying to tell me something here. So it was Coach O'Hara died, ankle gets blown out. And I was just like, oh. So I went in and Coach Verducci and I had a talk, and he wasn't like, you're done. He was like, you're welcome to be back here in the fall. fight your way back if you can. We got a spot for you here. And I said, Coach, I think I probably should hang it up. And that was a tough call because this was where I wanted to be. By the third year in, there's nothing I wanted to be but a Hawkeye. I see these kids nowadays, and we could talk about this later in the transfer portals. I was like, why would you ever want to leave? This place is great. I never wanted to go anywhere. I didn't care how hard it was getting. But it was this adversity, trying to come back from it, getting hit again, get another adversity. But at a certain point, I had to think through, okay, my body's kind of falling apart here. I better take care of it and get my grades. And my freshman year, my grade point wasn't great. And I spent 3 or 4 years clawing my way out of that. As I said before, despite my best efforts, I graduated. So I turned to focus on that. And I can keep going because the story, this is where it gets interesting.
Did you ever think you're going to get a scholarship, or did you ever get a scholarship, or you
I
still
did
were a
not.
walk-on?
I got up to the precipice and then bam. And that was Coach Ferentz and I talked about it prior to his leaving. That fall, I said, what are the shots? He's, you're looking good. Just keep doing what you're doing. Keep doing the little things right, and you will be rewarded for that. And then you just get hurt. I'm not bitter about it. Again, I look back on it. I said, I am who I am today because of where I was. And I liked it there. I learned a lot about being an adult, being a man, and learning about what to do when life kicks you in the teeth. And I didn't know at the time how important that was going to be until a few years later. So when I reflect back on it, I was like, I don't think I'd be alive if it wasn't for those experiences I had and things like that. But yeah, I was getting close and I would get kicked down and claw my way back. I wasn't a superstar and I wasn't the worst guy on the field, but it was an experience that I would never have changed.
I wonder if you were on scholarship, how that would change things. You would have probably felt pressure to stay if they're paying for the school, and
Absolutely. Yeah.
and maybe things do turn out differently.
Yeah.
Although of course it would have been great to have a scholarship, you also think could have ruined my body again further or had something else happen. So you can never like look back and say what if, because you never know. It could have been great or terrible. Yeah.
I always tell you, the grass is always greener. And I look at my friends, when I watch guys like Casey Wiegman who played in the NFL for years and years. I'm so proud of him. Mike Devlin, I went and saw Mike down in Jacksonville, which is just a couple hours from here. The Ravens were playing down there and he had us come around. We got to see him. We got some pictures. Hadn't seen him in years. And I'm so proud of him and what he's accomplished in his career. But I like where I'm at. And had things happen differently, I wouldn't be here. And I'm not talking about Tybee Island. I'm talking about the family and the wife and the kids and the job and the career I've had and the path I've taken. It has been really quite an experience. But you get to a certain point in your life, you start to reflect back and it's, would I have done anything differently? But you think back, I was very glad that I was there. And when I think back, I'm pretty glad I got out when I did.
Yeah, it's interesting how the journey can change like that, right? Some guys can stay healthy and some guys don't, and coaching changes, and yeah, a lot of things can change a trajectory quickly.
Timing and luck and that sort of thing.
Yeah, timing, luck. Like if someone gets hurt, you got to step up. That's a crapshoot at that point. It feels like everyone's in the same talent range. There's a few guys that are outliers, right? And all trying to fight for the same thing. You had a year with Coach Ferentz. Could you see his instinct for developing linemen and that? Or was that something you picked up later on? And now you look back and you got at least 2 Outland Trophy winners and numerous guys that have done really well and drafted highly and talented. Could you see that back then? Or was that something developed later on?
I did. You could tell there was something special about him. And at the time, I think he was in his 10th year at Iowa at that point. Was either 9 or 10 years back then. I can't.
Something like that. Yeah, I think he started
81. Okay, so he was about 8 years. He was 8 seasons. He was in Iowa. He had put a lot of offensive linemen into the NFL during that time frame. You think back to the Hilgenbergs and the.
Oh, I guess he had. You're right. Yeah, I guess I didn't. Yeah. I forgot kind of that backstory.
And you had a lot of guys who, but for an injury, would have been in the NFL. A couple of guys that got hurt and in 88, 89. And Bortz and all those guys from the early 80s. And then you get guys from the later 80s. And he had a talent for recruiting guys that he saw something raw in that he could develop. And my game as an offensive lineman in high school, I wasn't coached in high school a lot. It was the head coach and maybe one assistant. And there was I had to go to camps to learn how to do offensive lines technique stuff. And when I was in high school, my senior year was when you could start using your hands. That was the first year in Illinois high school. Before that, you had to do this whole thing here. They let the defensive lineman grab you wherever you want, jerks. And so I had to go and teach myself how to do all of that. But it got to this next level, and it was the pass pro and the technique on hand placement and feet placement and drop backs and how to get depth on an edge rusher, that sort of thing. I remember being up in the number twos one spring, or it was in the fall of 90. I can't remember exactly when, but I remember Leroy Smith. You remember Leroy? Kodak All-American. At least what they called it back then, not what they call it now.
That was
He was
91. Yeah, that
yeah.
breakout year.
And so I was playing left tackle in the twos, and I had to block him when it was 2-against-1s. And I don't have any, I'm not a fast guy. I think I ran a 5 flat in the 40 at my very best at one point in my life. But so I had to figure out how to get enough depth to get onto this guy and get him up. So it was like, just coach, just those techniques raise you to that level to be able to compete at that level. I never had to think about that before, but then I had to adjust my whole technique and everything to learn how to block a guy that fast. And I'm reflecting back and something comes to mind. There's a guy who was an offensive tackle for Iowa back in '89, George Hawthorne. You all remember, that name?
Sounds
Sounds
familiar. I don't know.
Fascinating guy. One of my favorite people in the world. We stay connected through the Instagrams and the interwebs and all that kind of garbage. But it's fun. I use it mostly to stay in touch with guys like him. He was an inspiration to me as a freshman. He's one of those guys that I call uplifters. He would have a chat with you one-on-one as a senior. I was this rum-dum freshman, and he would get you fired up and talk to me about your skills. He would teach you some little things. Hey, try this. And if you get yelled at or something, he's like, don't worry about it. Here's what you got to do. He was a real good guy. I remember we had lots of conversations when you get in there and it's just the talent level is so high and you're like, oh crap, what am I doing here? And so it was one of those guys. I just wanted to throw a shout out to big old George.
We have to get him on the podcast.
He was, I believe, a county sheriff in Maricopa County, Arizona.
Oh, wow.
Interesting guy. Fascinating guy, man. A funny story. I got 2 funny stories I like to tell people when they ask me about what was it like when you went there. I said, my freshman year, '89, they bring the freshmen in for a week. So it was a strange calendar that year. So we had 2 full weeks of 2-a-days. That was rough. It was like, and late '80s was a drought and it was hotter than hell in Illinois and Iowa. Yeah, we were there for a full week and then they bring in the big boys, right? All the upperclassmen come in. And then you have a couple of days with no pads. We'd already padded up a little bit. Then they bring us back, bring the guys in, they get them warmed up with half pads, helmet and shoulder pads or whatever it might be. And then they bring in full pads. I know things are a little different nowadays, but they lined us up first day of full pads. Okay, freshman offensive lineman over there. Okay, you're running over. You have no idea where you're going or what you're doing. And okay, blitz pickup. I was like, okay, I know what a blitz is, but I'm not real sure what we're doing. They huddle you up and they give you a card and they say, this guy's going there, this guy's going there, this guy's going there. You just block them, just get in their way. And that year was Brad Quast's senior year. Brad's a great guy. He was really nice to me as a freshman. I really enjoyed him. But I look up and my line was coming from the middle linebacker right to I was playing right guard, I think, in this particular drill. I look up and it's number 35. And I was like, I knew who that was. And that was, oh crap. And it was a funny thing is I remember the ball snapping and then I'm looking at this guy. That's it. There was nothing in between. He moved so fast and he ran over me. He ran 3. It was like I was just the air. It was just, and it just went right to, and I was just looking at the sky and he comes over, he's laughing and he's great, gives me a hand, held up. And he said, "Yeah, welcome to the big." I was like, okay, all right, this is a different game. And then the other one was, it was a little later in the season. It was a couple days later, and we were running scout team. And I'm down there on the meat squad, and I'm playing right guard again. and they show us the card. Okay, you're running it was a screen pass, play action screen pass or something to the going, and they were throwing it off to the right. So I was to pull around and pick up the middle linebacker. And so I pulled, and I come around, and Melvin Foster was playing middle linebacker. I was number 66 on the scout team. How important was it? At my Rose Bowl jersey is 53. They didn't double the numbers, and Melvin got his number and I didn't. So that's how I'm just to tell you where the hierarchy is. So I ran around the edge, and Melvin bites on the play action. His first day, he's still getting his legs under him. And this moron who loves contact and loves the ball. I caught Melvin. He probably doesn't remember this, but I caught him with my helmet underneath his, and I knocked him on his can. And he maybe won't admit to that, but it wasn't talent on my part. It was sheer luck. And oh my gosh, Coach Brazier over on the side starts yelling, "Melvin Foster, what are you doing?" And then the next words out of his mouth was, "Now run it again." And Melvin just looks at me and goes, "Yeah, let's run that one again." And I was like, "Oh, mistake. That was a huge mistake." And so we ran it again. I got my just desserts for doing that. And he's like, "Don't ever do that again." I said, "No, sir, no worries. It will not happen again." It's just one of those moments you're like, "Oh, that was a lesson learned real fast. Know your audience, know where you're at." Don't knock the All-American on his ass if he's not looking, that sort of thing.
That's some pretty stout competition here. Those names you're naming are not slouches by any means.
Man, I tell you, when they hit, it was like getting run over by a truck. It was just stars, and it was just like boom. It was like, what happened? It was crazy.
So you came in at 275. Did you stay around that weight, or did you bulk up quite a bit more?
I got up to, I think in 90, 91, I was running about 285, 290 as a lineman. And that was probably, I've hit 3 bills in my life and then some, but that's been a while. It's been 10 or 12 years since I was that heavy. I couldn't move very well at 290. So adding more weight was not really a good option. And I look at him now and it's, boy, back then that was a pretty decent size. There weren't a lot of guys playing over 300 at Iowa, if any. And now it's, if you're not 300, you're not playing. That's just, it's amazing.
That's why I was curious.
Yeah, so
the line definitely wasn't as big back then, for sure.
You think back to the time frame, and you look back at 1989, weight training was relatively new. It's within a decade before high schools started having their own weight systems and trainings ubiquitously. It was not common in the late 70s. And then in the 80s, they started to creep in with those universal machines. And then they would buy these cheap weight sets and they would have, but the workouts are mostly centered on powerlifting and just getting bulkier and bigger. And then you get into the 90s and things start to change a little bit. And then in the 2000s, the science got better. Nutrition science. We ate chicken wings because it's chicken. It's good for us. It's high protein. But it didn't matter if it was boiled in 6 pounds of butter. That was no problem. But they have nutritionists now. I got a chance to go into the football complex a couple of years ago and see Coach Ferentz and Rita Foley and walk around the facility a little bit. I hadn't been to Iowa City in 10 or 12 years, so it was fun to see that. Just the nutritional basis they have there didn't exist. You were on your own for food, basically, training table and stuff like that. But even then, it was like, just eat more stuff. But now the science is better. The training is, so these kids are bigger and stronger because they're eating better at an earlier age. They're getting bigger later in life, and there's more of them. I've always been amazed when I see these kids' size. And man, what are they feeding these kids? I think it's just a matter of nutritional science and weight training.
Yeah, definitely. It's amazing to see the transformation and all the different programs, the mental health and the physio and some of the other stuff that's really.
It's amazing. The support they give these kids. I think it's great. I think I was looking at, they had places where there's tutors, study rooms. You could go there. You didn't have to leave the facility except to go back to your dorm and sleep. From what I could tell, you didn't have that access. And it's not, oh, poor us. It was just the game's evolved. And I think it's good for the kids to get them in there and get them trained and focused. And I think the change they made, which really fascinated me, which would have helped me tremendously in my grade point average in my freshman year, was the 6 a.m. practices. We used to have practice at 3 o'clock in the afternoon or 3:30 or whatever time the horn blew. And now they do it 6 a.m. if I understand correctly. So you're not going out to the sports column for quarter draws when you got to be up by 5 to get to breakfast and get to practice. It's not happening. So it just changes their mindset a lot. I want to touch base on the guys who were seniors that in '89. And when I was a freshman, there's a lot of, I don't remember one guy who was a jerk, who would like, get out of here, kid, you don't belong here. Everybody was encouraging and wanted to build you up. And I think from my experience, that was me. And everybody's experience is a little different. But after that incident at the practice with Quasti, he had me go out with him and Peter Marciano like the next Friday night and said, "We're going to take you downtown." I was like, "Oh boy, here we go." And you're starting to see the generation of why my grade point average wasn't that great my freshman year. But so I got to go out with Peter Marciano, rest his soul. And that's Peter's, again, great guy, great Hawkeye. And it was so sad and tragic to see what happened to him. And that when he passed away, that was rough. But as far as the way they treated me as a freshman, I really appreciated that. And I learned a lot by what am I going to be like when I'm an upperclassman. And I try, hopefully I'm sure I was a jerk to some people, but maybe I was having a bad day. But when you guys were coming in like right as I was leaving, we didn't get a chance to know each other a lot back then, but it was, I really appreciated the way they dealt with the younger players. We can move on to the German days.
Schrobenhausen. Where's that at?
That is about 45 kilometers north of Munich. So it's in the middle of Bavaria. And it's the asparagus capital of the world. They've got a museum dedicated to asparagus and asparagus princess or queen that's crowned every year in the town festival. And it's funny. But the Bundesliga over there is, so their high school and colleges don't have sports. So it's all club league. And it works like soccer. Everybody's seen Ted Lasso. So as Americans, everybody understands now the promotion and relegation system that they have over there. It works like that. So if you start a team, it's funded by the government. If you win a lot, you get promoted up to the next level. You get more government funding, and you're able to maybe pay some players like us to come over and coach and play for you. However, they have rules, and Americans can only have 2 on the field at any given time. So you had a giant A painted on the back of your helmet. I think it's standard for American, but it may have been something else. So the first year I went over there, Schrobenhausen was the second year. The first year I went over was Munich Rangers. They are still a team. I think they've been promoted up a league or so. I was coaching a football camp after I got myself healed up after that spring where I stepped away. I was coaching a football camp at Monmouth College. I knew the head coach. He recruited me in high school, and he knew I had a desire to go to a higher level than Division III. Although he was a great coach, great program there for the Fighting Scots. But he put on a summer camp, and he had me come in and help coach the offensive line portion of the camp.
Were you still in school at
I
Iowa?
was.
Yeah,
I was going into my 4th year. And the Chicago Bears had been over putting on a clinic in Frankfurt, and this team, the Munich Rangers, was there. And they told the guy with the Bears, whose name is escaping me right now, not Jerry Venisi. Oh gosh, he was a Monmouth College grad, and all my Monmouth people are going to be yelling at me, "Oh, it's this guy." But he was an alumni at Monmouth College, but he was in the front office for the Chicago Bears. And he was a scout or something. So he called the head coach from Germany, from Frankfurt. This was a Friday. Kelly Kane was the coach at Monmouth College at the time. He said, "Kelly, we need a couple of guys who can come and play for 6 weeks for this German league team. They'll pay him a few $100s a week and fly him over here, give him a place to stay. Basically an all expense paid trip to Europe." And he takes a phone like that. I said, "Hey, Gillen, you want to go to Germany next week?" I said, "Why not? I don't got any place else to be." And so it was on a Friday. The next Tuesday, I didn't have a passport or anything. I had to go to Chicago and get a passport at the main passport office so I could get on a plane in O'Hare. So the next Tuesday morning, I was on a plane to Germany. And we stayed on the military base in Germany, which is no longer in Munich. They were shutting it down that summer. This was 2 years after the fall of the Soviet Union. And so we were pulling out of Germany because the reunification was happening for East and West Germany. And so Munich Mills was being turned over to the city of Munich for public housing or something. And so I stayed there with a sergeant who was one of the coaches of the team and his wife, and a guy named Tim Henson from Monmouth College flew over there, and we met up in Germany and got to know each other. We stay in touch. And we played 6 weeks worth, and I came back and switched quickly from Spanish to German in my foreign language requirement as I was wrapping up school. And the next summer, I got a contract to go back and play for Schrobenhausen. Then it was the Schrobenhausen Bears. They were a brand new team, so they were at the lowest level. And so I always tell people it's kind of going and playing in the Big Ten, and then a couple of years later, going back and playing at high school again. And they learn, boy, if I only knew then what I know now, it's okay, now's your chance. That's what the competition level was like. And the only other Americans that we were playing against typically were in the military. They didn't have college playing experience, things like that. And here's me in there. And the second year I went there, I took Mike Schwind, who was another offensive lineman from Iowa. We were both done playing, and we went over and had a great time. They like beer in Germany a lot. When in Rome. And it was
Summertime.
interesting. Yeah, they play all summer long. Guys were smoking on the sidelines and stuff. This is crazy. This is a Burt Reynolds movie, isn't it? But we had a great time. I think we were undefeated. We won the whole league at that level because we had some really decent players. Some of the German guys were really good. And of course, then Schwinn and there were a couple other guys there from Monmouth College. And they were really good too. They played defensive ends and defensive backs, and we were the linemen. So it was a lot of fun. We got to know those guys, and we traveled around Europe. Here's a funny visual for you. We had this team bus, and we called it the Gelbus Bus, which means yellow bus in German. And it had a giant cartoon bear painted on the side of it. And that's the bus we took to tour Europe after the season. So it was Mike and I and one of the other guys from Monmouth College, and Mike's girlfriend at the time, she was in the Air Force. She flew over for free and was able to meet up with us. And we drove into Prague, Czechoslovakia. And again, this is 93. And so the Soviet Union and the Iron Curtain was still fresh in our minds anyway. And so we're crossing a border in Czechoslovakia at midnight in this yellow bus with a cartoon bear and these guys with AK in the full uniforms. I think they may have been calling the Czech Republic then. I don't remember geopolitics at the time. But they were coming up and they had their machine guns. They were looking in the window at us. They're like, just go on. They checked their IDs and everything like that. That was an interesting time. We went around Europe and came back. And then it was time to come home for our senior year, or my 5th year at Iowa, and finish up in 94. So that was an adventure. It was a lot of fun. That team, the Bears, no longer exists. They do have a team in Schrobenhausen. And in Germany, the name for Bavaria, it's called Bayern. And that's where Bayer aspirin is made. So Bayern is how you say Bavaria in German. And so the language they speak and the people of Bayern and so it's the Schrobenhausen Fighting Bayerisch. And they got this guy doing this thing when he's wearing lederhosen instead of a thing. So they have a lot of fun with their
Like the Notre Dame logo.
Yeah,
almost.
it's Notre Dame logo, but it's a guy in lederhosen instead of a leprechaun. And so
I
I
see where
don't
they got
think
the
they paid for
bear
the
logo
licensing.
now.
Yeah. So it's a lot of fun. I would have traded that. That was great. 2 trips to Europe, had a great time. We worked construction and I was doing some bartending, got pretty fluent in German. And we finished up the season. This is the last story about Germany, and I'll let you go on to another question. 1993. And so Devlin had been drafted by the Bills. I think Matt Rogers had been drafted by the Bills. And the Bills were going to play the Vikings in an exhibition game in Berlin at the Olympic Stadium, where Jesse Owens won his gold medals and everything. So they made arrangements. They bought us all tickets for the whole team. We all got on a bus and drove because we're in Bavaria, and Berlin's way up in the northern, in the eastern, former Eastern Germany section of Germany. So it was about an 8-hour drive on the Autobahn in the bus. So we went up there and we went to the game in Schwind, Mike and I. Mike's from Dubuque, so he's a good German boy. We went up as close to the front row in the stadium behind the Bills bench, and we found Devlin because we could see his number, and we start screaming at him. Now, mind you, we're in the middle of Berlin. He has no idea we're there. And it was before social media. We didn't tell him. We just got our contract on the plane. We'll go, and we'll tell everybody about it later. And he turns around, and he's trying to focus on being his rookie season and getting some playing time. It's a preseason game. He turns around and sees these two knuckleheads in the audience in the front row screaming at him. He's like, what the? He grabs a trainer and he sends a trainer over to him. And this is the kind of guy Mike is. He goes, trainer said, you're not leaving with your group. You're staying here with him tonight at the hotel. I was like, okay. So he says to meet him at such and such a place after the game. So we go tell all of our teammates, hey, our friends just invited us to stay with the Bills at their hotel. And Mike's mom is from Germany. So she flew over for the game, and a whole bunch of his cousins came up from Berg or wherever down in the southern area of Germany, came up for the game. He says, my cousins will drive you home because they actually live like 45 minutes or an hour away from where you guys are living. So they'll just drive you to your house and you're good to go. Perfect. So we wind up going out. We go out with Mike Devlin and the entire offensive line of the Buffalo Bills and Jim Kelly. And so here I am, this is Rube from Illinois, and I'm sitting there and just sitting next to Jim Kelly in downtown Berlin in an outside cafe, drinking beer, listen to those guys tell stories. And that was a lot of fun. And we start talking German to Mike's mom. Again, Mike has no idea. He's been busy. This is the end of the summer, so we're pretty fluent by then because we've been working construction jobs. So we were forced into learning the language. And he just looked, what the hell? You could barely pass a class, and now you're speaking German to my mom? What is... So that was a lot of fun. And Jim Kelly was a great guy, and the offensive line guys were awesome. And we had a great time. I don't remember much of the evening, but it was a blur. We wound up back at the hotel and crashed there and saw Bruce Smith and Thurman Thomas. All those guys were hanging around. That was a thrill for the two of us. And but that's the kind of guy Mike was. So you're not going home. You guys are coming out with us tonight. I was like, okay, that's awesome.
It's an amazing story. By fluent in German, you mean eine Bier bitte? That was what you're fluent in?
Right now I'm rusty. I do the Duolingo every day just to stay on it because it's fun, because I got pretty good at it in 93. And when I came back in 90 and took my first German class at Iowa, or it was not my first class, that first semester back from my second trip to Europe. And I started talking to the professor, and the way I said numbers or something, he was like, you lived in Bavaria, didn't you? You were in, I said, yeah, I lived in the South, and we worked construction, so we were shouting numbers. So we were speaking Bayerisch, which is a whole different dialect, for most of the summer. So most of the way we said numbers and some of the vowel combinations and stuff were slightly different, and the words were slightly different. But so he recognized right away. So that was cool. So it was an unexpected thing to be thrown at us. I Forrest Gump my way over there, and the guy from the Army hands Forrest Gump that brochure. Have you ever thought about your future? Like, Coach Kane was like, hey, do you want to go to Germany on Tuesday? I said, sure. Why not?
And you never could have done that being on the team still, probably, right?
No, absolutely not.
Because I guess you were paid, so yeah. Okay.
I'm sure that Coach Fry was mad as hell. I gave up the rest of my eligibility. Yeah. I always joke with people. I remember the first time I went on the field in Iowa. It's the greatest one. That's the moment. It's vivid in my mind. I remember Coach saying, Shawn, okay, go on in. I remember the Coach O'Hara looking at me and sending me in. And I was like, oh my God. And the run from the sidelines to the huddle just seemed like forever, because it was just like, oh my God. And, screaming fan. We were playing Cincinnati, and we were beating them bad enough that Coach Fry felt okay with putting me in the game. So that was how bad of a thrashing that was. So I always tell any friends of mine that are Cincinnati fans, I said, let me tell you about when we played Cincinnati. I said, this is how bad we beat them. I got in the game. That's, if that tells you anything. So that was a lot of fun. And that, I remember that moment. You guys remember what it's like coming out of the tunnel and at Kinnick. And it used to be on the other side, right? It was
Coming down the stairs.
yeah, came down those steep stairs and come out. And then the first guy's helmet would like poke out of the tunnel, and the crowd would just go explode. Now, that I'll never forget. And I miss that. That's a really amazing feeling because every eye is just looking at that little corner of the stadium. And then I remember that moment of getting in the game, and my dad's in the stands, my mom's in the stands, and I think I had a couple of cousins at the game, and they're like, "Oh, let's come up and see how it goes. He's probably not getting in." And boom, got in. That was a thrill. That was, when I went to Iowa with that goal, I said, you know what, I need to prove to myself I can compete at this level. That's when it really hit me. It was like and talk is cheap. That was the moment where I was like, okay. And then you go back, you watch film, and you just says, hey, I did okay in there. I didn't get knocked on my ass. That was fun. And so that was probably the most vivid moment of my time at Iowa, was that first time of going on that field. And that was really cool.
I'd have to agree with you with that. Yeah, you're up in that little locker room, walking down the steps, and then it just opens up, and it's just, there's black and gold everywhere. Everybody's screaming. It's
this
like
wall of sound. Yeah.
That first time you're like, wow, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And then I guess as I got older, I'd be back in the swarm, different spots, and you work your way up to when you got to be a senior, and then you were like the front of it.
Yeah.
That little kind of jog out. Everybody's holding hands. It was like, yeah, it was awesome. It's fun.
Special
one of the best feelings. You're just like, holy cow, this is a great atmosphere.
So things start to get interesting after Germany. So
more interesting.
There's a lot of stories I could tell about Germany, like the 300-person brawl that broke out that I don't think I started, but there's a distinct possibility. I didn't do anything. I was nothing illegal, but that was
nothing to see here. Please disperse.
I was like, what I do?
Right. You're like, whoa.
No, that's a story for another time. So I come back my senior year, and here's one of those things where sometimes I start to worry myself about what I can, what are you thinking? When you look back at it, you're like, you should have recognized something was wrong. So my entire senior year, especially that last semester, my gums were bleeding. And then I would get, and I remember even in football, I would always get I have bruises all over me. The defensive linemen were always cheating. And if you're watching, they say, you got that, Wells? And grabbing you and pinching you and that sort of thing. And so I had bruises all over. And so I didn't think anything of it. And then come back after getting back from Germany, and then I was getting winded pretty easily. I'd walk up steps and I was like, "Kid, God, I'm out of shape." And I thought it was just beer drinking and not being at practice every day and in the weight room. And you go from burning 10,000 calories a day and eating 10,000 calories a day to just continue to eat that. And I was like, oh, I'm probably just overweight and out of shape. And then a couple of mornings I would wake up and I would have like blood coagulated in my mouth. And I was like, what is, it's just something. I must have gum disease. I need to go to the dentist. I'm just an idiot, not wanting to admit to what's going on. And then I was able to get myself through graduation, and I get home. Randy Ball, who was the head coach at Western University, had hired me as a grad assistant, and I was going to go there and I was going to coach, get my master's degree in something. I didn't know what yet. I'm from Monmouth, and I called him up at the office, and I'm looking for a position. Didn't know if you were looking for any graduate assistants. And we had a conversation, and he was like, absolutely. I told him who I was and had a couple people say, if you need to check on me, here's some people you can call. Coach Fry is always a big help with that. He would always help you out, no matter who you were or what you wanted. And Coach Verducci, too, at the time, was very helpful. Then he hired me as a GA, and so I was all set. I was just going to get my master's degree, become a football coach, maybe a high school teacher or something. I don't know. The world is my oyster. And I remember my mom was like, you really don't look good. Something's off with your color. What was happening was getting jaundiced, and we'll get to the whys and hows of that. And I was like, I'm fine. I was at the weight room last night. I was working out, doing this, and I'm doing better. And I go to a wedding or at some point during that time period, and a friend of mine from high school, and I've never told him, I need to tell him this. He'll say, hey, you saved my life. I think maybe I did. Because he looked at me, no holds barred. I said, you look like shit. You need to go to the doctor. There's something wrong with you. What? I go, what? I said, you got something seriously wrong. And he would not let it go. And he was just like in my face. And I was like, I'm not that big of a guy. And I was like, shut up. Leave me alone. Tell me what to do. So I was like, fine. And so I made a doctor's appointment. This was in June. So it was only a few weeks after graduation. And I went to the doctor. And if you ever take a blood test and the doctor sprints down the hallway to bring you your blood test results, he's not bringing good news. They don't get excited over normal. It was numbers that were so bad. He was in a panic, and he came in, started firing questions at me and this and that. And he says, we got to get you in the hospital, get you a blood transfusion, right? I was like, what the hell? I'm 23 at the time. I've been 23 at the time. And, I thought I knew everything. I was like, what is this clown talking about? And so he says, according to the blood test, something's really wrong. Was basically what he's saying. Your blood counts are almost zero. So you either have a very rare form of leukemia, you have aplastic anemia, or you have AIDS. And I was like, oh. He goes, it's one of the three. He just looks at me right now. It is one of those three. And I was like, oh, which one do I want? He goes, you want aplastic anemia. I said, oh, because we can either treat that or we can do something about it. He says, you don't want this rare form of leukemia, and you certainly don't want the other one. And so it turns out some rigmarole in the next day, next 24 hours of my parents just getting the news and this and stuff. And I was like, what the hell? So that's a moment where there's before and after. It's everything that happened before that time and everything afterwards. So everything that happened afterwards was we went to Iowa City, to the University of Iowa hospitals and clinics, where they tried to do a bone marrow biopsy on me in my hometown there at the hospital, and the lady didn't know what she was doing. It was some visiting doctor or something. And I don't know if you ever had one of those. Is they take this steel rod and without you're awake for it, and they shove it into your pelvic bone. Just and you can hear it crunch, and it's the worst pain you ever felt. And then they aspirate the bone marrow out of your hip joint, and then that hurts like hell. And it's supposed to take 30 seconds, maybe. This lady was cranking on me for 5 minutes. And I remember I broke the sidebar of the bed, and I was about the lady across the room, but she couldn't get a good enough sample. So we had to go to Iowa City, we had to do another one. And I told them what happened. So they basically drugged me up. They got this giant guy, and I said, I don't need him flinching. So let's dope him up pretty good. So they cranked me up with some sedative or something just to calm me down, and did that one. So ultimately, over the years, I had about 5 of those, and that was never any fun. I hated them. But they confirmed the diagnosis of aplastic anemia. So that is basically idiopathic aplastic anemia. Idiopathic means we have no clue how this happened, but you have it. And it could have been an environmental, it could have been a virus, could have been leaking gas fumes in the Gelbus boost we were driving around Europe. And we don't know. So we get up into Iowa City, and they tell us what the diagnosis is. Say, here's your options. And they start testing my brothers and my sister as bone marrow matches, because I think my platelet count was almost zero. Typically, your platelet like 300,000 parts per whatever, and mine was at like 4 or 3,000. So it was, what could happen is you could hemorrhage internally just by being bumped, and you're done. You're toast, because they won't be able to stop your bleeding. And so that's the danger. That's why the guy was freaking out, because you bump your head, you're a dead man. And I was like, okay, thank you. Let's go get this taken care of. So yeah, I'm freaking out. I don't know what the hell's going on. So they confirm it. The options are, they want to see if it's autoimmune. So they would treat that with prednisone. So they gave me like 100 milligrams of prednisone a day. I don't know if anybody knows anything about, I think this, but it was like 10 times or 100 times more than they would give someone, say, with asthma or something. And so we're going to do this for the next 6 weeks or whatever time frame, 6, 7 weeks. We're going to see how it works, get your affairs in order and everything like that, and we'll get you into the bone marrow unit. I think in about a week, I gained 30 pounds and I slept about 3 hours a night. I ate 4 or 5 or 6 full meals a day, which meant like a Whopper and some fries, and it was awesome. And so that time period was pretty good. I was getting blood transfusions every day, and my doctor didn't believe in using, if you get enough platelet transfusions, you can have allergic reactions. And I did. I went into anaphylactic shock during one of them. So they just got to trickle it in. And some doctors give you Benadryl, like injection, and some doctors don't. My doctor didn't believe in that because the Benadryl is a blood thinner. It can thin your blood, so it means it gets rid of the platelets. So he gave me basically, it was an opioid. It was Demerol. And so he would give me a shot of Demerol if I started getting hives and this and that. So it was all in all a great summer. I was high as a kite and I was 8. So then you get so many transfusions, they give you the permanent port. So mine was called a Hickman catheter. I still got a massive scar on my chest, which is cool looking. But by the time it didn't work, my bone marrow didn't bounce back. So one of my brothers was a match and my sister was a match. So my other brother, he's screwed if he ever needed a match. But they didn't use my sister because she had children that creates antibodies they didn't want to mess with. So my brother was my donor. He gets married in August, spends his honeymoon in Iowa City. We were in Ohio for his wedding. Everybody came to Iowa City at the end of August, I should say. So beginning of September. Yeah, it's summer run. And he donated his bone marrow, which in the transplant, the actual transfusions, everything, that's worse because they got to put you to sleep and drill into your hips and they take out a couple big IV bags full of bone marrow. And this, they do it differently now. This is back in, it's 31 years ago now. That's almost prehistoric, right? And so then for me was a week of chemotherapy, like 4 days of chemo, 4 or 5 days of chemotherapy, and then 4 or 5 days of radiation. Something happened to me for 8 straight days. And I think, so the idea is they completely kill off your bone marrow. So it's just like, you're just radiating it and filling you full of. Boy, I remember the name on the side of the IV bag was cytotoxin, which means cell poison when you translate it. So there's a moment there, and this is something that I've never really talked about. So there's a moment, you got that Hickman catheter, and this is where they're plugging everything in. It was chemo first. So this is how I know that, because they're plugging you in the chemo, and it's nonstop chemo, 24 hours a day for 4 days. They just keep switching the bags, and and there's all kinds of things that are things you didn't have to think about. Like they had to flush your bladder, and they have to measure everything that comes out of you because they're measuring everything that goes into you. So that gets a little gross, right? But the moment they plug that into you, the chemotherapy is the point of no return. So in my mind, that's it. Okay, the nurse comes in, and my mom was there, and I said, okay, we need to take a moment here. And I had to think through, okay, what are we doing? And started to think about, okay, how are we going to get through this? And all I had was, of course, there are not a lot of atheists on the bone marrow floor. There was some prayer going on. God, trying to cut deals. You get me through this one, I'll never drink another drop of beer and this and that, and I'll be nice to my brother or whatever. But the real thing was, the only thing I had to fall back on was what I had learned from Coach Fry, Coach O'Hara, and all the coaches there. And it's no one thing, it's the series. You got to show up. You got to do the little things. And you've got to focus on what you control. And you've got to keep your head under pressure. So here we're full circle to that point I was making before with Coach Ferentz using that word poise. You got to keep your head under pressure because there's not going to be much more pressure than what you're going to get in about 2 minutes. So we're hooking you up and they turn that little dial. There's no turning back. You'll die or you'll live. And it's 50-50. Nobody really knows how this is going to turn out. And okay, what do I control? I control getting out of bed in the morning, doing the thing I need to do in the bathroom so they can measure everything. I'm not crying, whining about it, and this and that. And I had a nurse, and she was probably 120 pounds, soaking wet, if that. And her name was Roxanne. She got real tired of coming in on shift. I would do the whole Eddie Murphy thing. And that, to me, was hilarious every time. She was like, whatever. But she was a fireball, and she was my primary nurse. And she came in the mornings and got me out of bed. And I was 320, 330 pounds of just puffed up water weight, and my face was swollen. I was bald. We had a party at, you all know Bubba, right? Those of you who don't know who Bubba is. We had a party at his house. We call it the bone marrow transplant party. So yeah, we got some beer. We had a bunch of friends. And at midnight, we ritualistically shaved my head because I was losing my hair anyway. We shaved my head and we had a good time. And so that was the night before. And so I went in, I didn't have any hair on my head. I'm not a pretty bald man. And it was ugly. Looked like Uncle Fester and Hulk Hogan had a baby. And it was just huge, tall, puffed up, or the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man look, that sort of thing. But that's the moment to where it was, okay, you got to keep your head, focus on what you can control, and don't think about what the negative is, because you don't control that. The only outcome you focus on is getting home. And that was it. And I read back, and years later, I read the leadership book, Good to Great. Y'all read that? And he talks about
Jim Collins?
Yeah, he talks about the Stockdale paradox. James Stockdale was Admiral James Stockdale from Warren County, Illinois, went to Monmouth College. He also ran for vice president with Ross Perot back in 92. Y'all remember that?
I do.
He was a prisoner of war for 10 years. The Hanoi Hilton, first jet fighter pilot shot down over Vietnam, that sort of thing. And so the Stockdale paradox is this: the impossibility of the situation you're in, yet you never quit. You're more than likely going to die, but you never stop doing the things you need to do to survive. I hadn't read that book yet, but years later, that's what we learned early on. And that's why I say, really, I wouldn't be here today had I not gone through that. Failed when I failed, got back up, failed again, got back up, and had a taste of success here or there, made great friends, and learned things from some of the best coaches the game has ever seen. And that's something that I've internalized it so much because they hammered in it. And that's what I fell back on, because that's all I had. So I can't imagine what would have happened had I not had that experience and had to go through that. I wouldn't have been able to focus like that. That's what I'm really proud of. That's something that I could take with me. I've used that again and again in life, in my career, in graduate school, and things like that. So I'll stop there, see if you get questions. That was a lot, and it was pretty heavy. And I make light of it. I laugh a lot about it because it happened to me, and I was like, I don't think about it every day, but when I do think about it, it's like, holy crap, that actually happened.
That's incredible. Thanks for sharing that. I know it's a deeply personal thing. I think it's amazing. It's elite level resilience. I think there's a tendency, at least back in the moment, to have this hierarchy of who was doing what and how successful they were and all that stuff would match each other up that way. But at the end of the day, it's kind of like whatever you do in life, it's those skills, it's those moments that you use those things, right? That's the important part. It doesn't matter what the journey was or what the level was, but it's like you, I guess, to some degree, got that and just served you for the rest of your life, which is interesting to think about.
It did.
Hello, and welcome to our wonderful University of Iowa Stead Family Children's Hospital. This beautiful building, which opened to patients in the early months of 2017, has provided children with the ideal healing environment to match our world-class system of healthcare. We are Iowa's only comprehensive children's hospital, meaning we offer every pediatric subspecialty. We have the UI Stead Family Children's Hospital Press Box, a special viewing space with the city's best view of Kinnick Stadium. Many children and their families have caught a Hawkeye football game from this spot and taken part in the other side of Iowa's greatest tradition, the wave. The ultimate gesture of care and compassion. And the next time you're looking up at our windows, please give a wave.
Another example was graduate school. I left my job. I became mayor of my hometown, for crying out loud. And so that was in local government parlance. It was a strong mayor form of government. So I was a CEO. This was in 97. So it was like 3 years after the transplant. So people knew who I was. I kind of had a name, and I had to build on the name. I had no experience. I was an English major at Iowa. And here I am, I'm thrust in. So I'm the CEO of a corporation, and I'm in charge of department heads. And these people from my hometown. So I went to high school with their kids. So I had to forge my leadership style off of that. You guys know more about running this than I do, so let's talk. And I thought back, I said, what's the only thing I had to fall back on again at that moment was, how did Coach Fry run his team? When was he the most successful? When his assistants were the best assistants he could get. That's when you saw the Rose Bowl teams. And there were ups and downs, and people came and went over the 20 years. But he was successful when he would find those great people and let them do their job. And he would preach that to us. Hold them accountable, but let them do their job. So that was my whole management philosophy, was trying to do what Coach Fry would do. And I know it's silly and it gets some chuckles, but scratch where it itches. That's a philosophy. And for me, it has worked. It's like, find out what it is we need. So when I've worked in city government my entire life, my entire career. And that is the essence of the kernel of everything that we do when I'm a city manager. What is it we need to work on? Where are our weak points? What is it we need to fix? Is it water systems, sewer systems? Is it general finance? Do we need to fix this? Do we need what is our tax base shrinking? Is our tax base growing? And what are the things we can control that we can get in? So we scratch where it itches. And so I love saying that around here, because it's SEC country down here and they have no idea what I'm talking about. And I said, okay, that kills in Iowa, that one liner. But down here, they're like, huh? And when I explained to them, like, oh yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
It's really quite interesting that you really were pushing to get into football, and then just circumstance sort of prevented that, or kept you out of that, which is
I had to
think about. That was your passion.
Here's what was going on. I was coaching football after the transplant. So it took me about a year to get back on my feet, because I still have neuropathy. I can't feel my feet. You're wondering what chemotherapy is. That's one of the 30-year lasting things, from like the end of my toes to the tip of my toes. And I'll bang it into something. Like, I'm not going to look at that until later, because I know it's not going to be good. Can't feel it, but I could tell it was hard enough to break it or something. But that's just one of those quirky things that I kind of have fun with it. Coaching at Monmouth College as the offensive line coach, I was having a great time, and I was taking classes, getting certified to teach, was going to go be a high school football coach and English teacher. That was the plan. I was also writing a newspaper column for the local newspaper. So every Friday, my friend and I, who's a quadriplegic, would write a newspaper column. That was a challenge. He had partial use of one arm. There's a long story there. We'll get into that later, but he's a great guy. He passed away many years ago, but we would write a column together. One of my favorite ones was, some parents got mad because their daughter took home a Kurt book, and everybody was going nuts on each side of the issue. We're trying to ban this as censorship. The news media we wrote this weekly column, and we were sitting there talking about it, and we're like, why don't we ask what he thinks? Was my smart alecky thing, because I was too dumb to know you weren't supposed to be able to call a famous author up. And he said, my friend goes, yeah, that would be cool. Let's give it a whirl. So I found one of his books, a publisher, got his agent's name, called his agent, told him what was going on, and he says he would love to talk to you. He loves this stuff. Oh my gosh, you're going to make his day. But here's the thing, I'm going to give you his home phone number in Manhattan, but you have got to destroy it when you're done with it. I don't want to hear about it. I know who you are. I say, don't worry about it. So I was at Monmouth College. I was in the middle of my day. flexible hours. I had classes and I was coaching. So I called him up and he answered, and he was a great guy, super fun guy to talk to. And he gave me some great quotes for the article. And I, of course, me, the knucklehead, I'd read his stuff. I was an English major. I knew who he was. And now I've read everything he's ever written. I love the guy. But all I could think about this entire conversation was you in that Rodney Dangerfield movie when he hired you to write his paper and got a C and then wouldn't pay you. And so we had a fun time talking about that a little bit. And so that was a great adventure. What a great person he was. But that was one of the interesting things. So we started building from that. Then I ran for office, became a mayor. And since 1997, I've been in local government. Went to Lexington, Kentucky, worked for them for a while as a chief of staff. They have a 15-member city council. It's a merged city-county government. It's consolidated government. So they have 15 members on their city council, and I was their chief of staff. I had the opportunity to go back to grad school. So here's where this next thing is: to keep your head and focus on what you can control, do the things you can do, the little things. So my wife, I come home to my wife once, and she's 7 months pregnant with our second daughter. And I said, I have been offered a PhD position at the University of Kentucky, which is one of the top public finance schools in the nation. It ranks higher than Harvard, and it's always up there with Syracuse and all. So she goes, "Oh, great. So you'll have some extra money coming." And I said, "No, I got to quit my job with health benefits, and I'm gonna go back and we'll make $13,000 a year as a stipend, and we'll have medical insurance through the university." And my advice to any young husband: don't do that to your 7-month pregnant wife. Find a different. But it was one of those things where we burned our ships. I said, we're going to do this. We're going to do it because it's a no-fail situation. I had 2 daughters at that point. They were babies, a mortgage to pay and all this stuff. I was an English major, and I'm thrown into an economics class where he's just writing calculus on the chalkboard. And I'm like, I haven't taken calculus in 12 years. I don't know what the. So I went in and I talked to the professor. He's the guy. You ever had a coach, you just tore your hair out? You're like, oh, I hate that guy. But now you look back and say, that guy made me. That's the guy. He was like that coach, but he was an economics professor. His name is David Wilderson. He and I had a talk. I said, listen, I'm a little worried because my cohorts are all 23 years old. I was in my 30s. These guys, they're right out of grad school. They've just had this stuff, and they're all math majors and economics majors. How do I get ready for this? He says, you go in, you audit calculus classes. So for 2 semesters, I audited a calculus course at University of Kentucky, and the guy would grade my homework. He said, you either learn calculus or your family is out on the street. That was in my mindset. The payback is great because city managers make this much. It's gone up significantly since then. So the payback was going to be there. But it was like one of those things where it's like, okay, I had to fall back again on that. How do I do this? Okay, I got to break this into, we got to train. So what is it? I got to learn a whole new language, which is calculus. I got to learn to read academic literature. I got to learn to write in an academic voice. I've got to learn all this stuff because I had to write a dissertation in 3 years, and I didn't even know what a literature review was, and I didn't pass my qualifying oral exam for the economics, and I was like, what is going on? And so I went and talked to the professor. He says, calm down. All you got to do is do it again. He says, this is a matter of repetition. You need more reps at this. He started talking to me in football language. He said, you don't get it right the first time, especially since you've never been exposed to this before. The more exposure you've had. I always think back to it. That first economics course was Brad Quas coming across the line and just running through me. It was like, oh, this is what it's like. This is heavy duty stuff. I better be ready. So you go back and you retrain, and we got it done. And we got through it. My dissertation chair was able to help me get a job for 1 year. So as I was writing my dissertation, I was teaching at Eastern Kentucky University, and the chair of the department was kind enough to get me scheduled for 2 days a week, all my classes in Richmond, Kentucky, which was about 45-minute drive from Lexington, and was able to go to the UK library and do my dissertation work. So I treated it like a job. Got there at 8 o'clock in the morning, did all my regression work and typing of my dissertation chapters in an office where we could leave our stuff. You had a key. It was for PhD pro. And so it was treated like a job. Went to one university, did my teaching and grading, came home and did the other one. And my daughter's about to walk in the door here. So sorry, she's been babysitting. I got through that, and my wife was pregnant with our third baby and writing a dissertation. And I always joke, you see, the hardest part of writing a dissertation was getting the margins right. So the grad school lady would get her little ruler out and it would line up just perfectly for the printer. So other than that, it was pretty easy. Now, along with being at Iowa football, it was a very humbling experience to go through that. And then one more story about that same sort of theme that I'll share is my career took me from Lexington, and I was teaching at EKU, which where Lee Majors went to school, by the way. So I always told the story that my office used to be his dorm. They had converted it from him. I don't know that, but wound up in Minnesota, way up in the northern part of Minnesota, a place called Grand Rapids, birthplace of Judy Garland. When you're in local government, you learn everything about the little town you're in. So Judy Garland was born up there. The winters got long. So we wound up in Doraville, Georgia. I was up there. I was our first city manager. I was up by Atlanta. It's right on the perimeter. If anybody knows the 285 that surrounds Atlanta. We lived up in Atlanta for 4 years. And we would vacation down here on Tybee Island every June when they had a municipal league conference down here, the Georgia Municipal Association. And so we would rent a place out on Tybee instead of Savannah and just stay out here. And it was great. And the girls would come and they'd go swimming. I'd go to the conference, come home, go out, and we'd stay a few extra days. And we said, boy, wouldn't it be great to live here one day? So we started pricing houses, and I thought the goal would be to get a house and somehow finagle financing for a second house, which then you could short-term rent to pay the bills on and stuff like that. And then when we retired, we moved down here, and then the job came up, the city manager position. So I talked to my wife, and she was, yeah, let's go for it. Why not? They'll probably say no. So we get down here, and I interviewed, and they offered the job relatively quickly and enough money that we got creative with it to where they helped with closing costs and things like that, because housing is expensive on an island. It's coastal. And then you've got all the coastal issues like flood insurance. So we were able to negotiate some of that stuff to get me to live on the island. And so we still live in that same house. I have a background that doesn't show my house because I am still renovating after 8 years. This week is 8 years exactly on Tybee Island. And it is a fixer-upper. And we tell people this, if we had moved here today, we wouldn't be able to afford to live here. Prices have gone up that much. So that's good for homeowners. That's awesome. But I was on the job for 93 days when Hurricane Irma hit. And it's like day 80. And we're starting to get these alerts that there's a storm system out. They had just been hit 11 months earlier. Hurricane Matthew sideswiped them, knocked out a ton of trees, huge windstorm. They hadn't been hit by a hurricane like that in 100 years. So people gotten complacent, and a lot of people stayed on the island. And a lot of those people said, I'm never doing that again. Riding a hurricane out is insane. So we get here, and sure enough, in September, it was late August, last week of August, we started getting reports of tropical storm Irma forming out in the Atlantic. And then it quickly becomes a hurricane, and it quickly forms into a Category 5 hurricane. And they're tracking it right at us. We're like, oh, crap. So the track we look at, you learn a lot about weather when you're living on an island, is it comes up the eastern coast of Florida. And if it tracks along the eastern side of Florida and it follows the coastline, we're in trouble, because it's just the way the geography is. We're going to get slammed straight on. It hasn't happened since 1893, but at that point, the entire island was underwater for a short time period, and then the water went back out. So it was like, oh, here we go. This is going to be good. And I remember we were forming our team. They'd just been through this. So we had they knew what they had to do. We had the right contacts in place, had people get what's called NIMS, the National Incident Management System, which was developed after 9/11. And it's a multi-governmental levels local, city, county, state, federal ways of disseminating work and authority. So under that program, when the storm comes, I'm in charge. I am the incident commander on the island in charge of the evacuation, which I've been here 93 days. Why not? We could do this. And then I look at the New York Times. I think it was the New York Times. They had a headline, largest storm in recorded history. I was like, hey, hell, why not? We're going to have one. Let's have a big one. It was like, we've been here 3 months. What is going on? And this thing is coming up, tracking up that line. It's the worst possible conditions. And so we're like, everybody's out. My family is like, you getting out, get the hell out of here. So they went to Atlanta and stayed with friends up there. And I'm here. I'm the last one off the island. So we're getting all of our equipment. We have our zero time. So this is the last point we can get off the island because the gale force winds, when you're going over the bridge, will blow our heavier equipment literally into the ocean. So we had this point where we're gone at 10 a.m. Monday morning, or whatever day it was. I think it was Monday. And the storm was going to hit us Monday morning. And so we had everything planned. And then overnight, that storm shifted inland. And we're like, that's our evacuation point, Statesboro. And we had a couple other places where we would evac to take necessary equipment like backhoes and trucks. You abandon a lot of that expensive equipment. We took most of the fire trucks off. They're so expensive, but a lot of stuff you just left. But then we take tractors and stuff we would need to clear the road to get people back into the city because people want to get back in their homes because their drywall was wet and they wanted to get it out of there. It got moldy and all that did more damage. We were ready to evacuate. I think we were heading Statesboro. And then it shifts inland and we're like, that thing is going to hit where we're going. So we made a decision, okay, if it doesn't change by 10 a.m. tomorrow, we're going to shelter in place. We need to let everybody know. We had our offsite team to run payroll and payables in a separate city. We had all this planning in place. It's really cool. And it was my role evacuating a city 90 days into a job. I'd never seen a hurricane. I've seen tornadoes. And it took 2 weeks to get there. Someone said it's like getting stalked by a turtle. But it hit us September 11th, 2017 at about noon. The wind damage was inland, so it missed us. But it was a Category 5, and it had a storm surge, which is the real dangerous part of a hurricane. The wind you can get out of and then shelter from. But if a storm surge comes, it's bringing a tidal wave. But it's just pushing that water up. A big one was coming, and we were having a high tide anyway. And the storm surge is going to hit high tide. The last high tide didn't go back out because there was so much pressure coming in from this massive storm that was pushing the water in. We have a 7.5-foot tide variation on a regular. So that's one of the biggest tide deviations on the eastern seaboard. And the high tide didn't go back out. Just sat there. And we're like, this is weird. We've never seen this before. So we went out and we just watched as the water came in. It came in. We had barricaded everything in the front end. So we got some flooding through the dune system, which we've made better by now. But it came around the backside in the marsh area where it just came up and it just creeped in real slow. Over a couple hours, the water just came up, went over the streets and over people's yards into people's houses, would get up 3 or 4 feet in some people's homes. It got within about a block and a half of my house. I'm apparently one of the high points of the island. If you've ever been to Tybee, it's really flat. There's not a lot of elevation at all. We got lucky and about 700 homes. And then it went out. And so the next day it was recovery, getting FEMA in, getting GEMA in, getting all the EMAs to work together and getting the equipment we needed. First 72 hours were on our own because the bridges got touched by the water. So you can't cross the bridge till the engineers get here. And the engineers have to come from the other side of the county and they have to work their way across. And we're the last one. And so we were there for 2 days. No power, no cell phones, no nothing. We had enough food for everybody. And so that was the planning ahead. You got to have enough food in place to shelter for 72 hours because you're cut off. And so that was interesting. That was a moment to where it's like, okay, what do we know? What do we do? And so it was they needed someone to make decisions. It's like, I can make a decision. What information do you have? And here's the information we have. Then that's all we can make a decision based on. This is what we're going to do. And so I think you can't sit around and point fingers and yell at each other. And I thought back to the days where you watch Coach Fry on the sidelines. They got into each other's faces. The coaches were always best of friends and getting along all the time. But the focus was getting the job done. We'll deal with that later. But right now, we're going to focus on what we need to do and staying cool when it was getting pretty heated out there, and just, this is what I control. This thing could have shifted back and hit us directly, and we would have been underwater. We would have been in mortal peril at that point because the people in the know were guiding us to. Now, it's going to stay that path. You're better off staying where you're at because it's going to hit over here instead of here. And that's what's crazy when we get those cones of uncertainty. We use that word a lot down here, that it does anywhere inside that cone could possibly be hit. The closer you get to 0 hour is interesting. So that was a little hurricane story for inside baseball and how we deal with hurricanes. And we had, I think, 2 more evacuations in my time here. We got better at it each time. We got more efficient. We knew what to do. We had to get trucks. We had to empty the evidence locker at the police station. Not something you think about. Any vital records that couldn't be replaced had to be put on a truck and taken to Hunter Army Airfield. I think that's where they went during Matthew, or Statesboro, with Georgia Southern University in Statesboro. So those are the sorts of things you don't think a lot about until you're in the heat of the moment, and you can't wait until it's happening to make all the decisions. I think I was at my best with that because of what I learned early on in my life was focus on what you can control. Just don't panic. That's going to get somebody killed. Just stay focused and have poise.
Wow. Especially like we don't know the area that well. It's not like you've been there 7, 8 years already and you have the lay of the land and know people and build trust already. And so to help get things done and people having to trust you quickly, I think that's probably speaks to your character a bit too.
Yeah, and it's been interesting this last year. Of course, to finish up the story, we give you another health crisis. I think I told you guys about it.
Yeah.
So in May of 2023, I had a heart attack. What was interesting about this, listen to your wife, guys, your wife. I was like, oh, man, I got gas. And she's, maybe you should go to the doctor. I said, nah, I'm fine. What are you talking about? I'm fine. So I went to work and I was dealing with some typical stressful stuff that a city manager deals with. This council member's mad, the mayor's mad, or this citizen's mad. They don't call you when they're happy. They just call you when they're mad. And there was some stuff going on. It was raising my stress levels pretty high. And that night I came home and I was remodeling a bathroom and I was cranking on the sink and putting a new faucet on. And I told my wife, I was laying down, I think it was gas because it feels a little bit better. And then I go to bed that night and I couldn't sleep. And that's never a problem for me. I sleep like a baby. And so I'm out on the couch and I just can't. My wife comes out at 4 a.m. She's getting in the car. We're going to the doctor, going to the emergency room. She calls, she tells my daughter, well, we're feeling we're going to take her to the emergency room. And we get there and they take a blood test right away because I was like, yeah, I just think I got some gas. Maybe it's a panic attack or something. I don't know what's going on. And they take a blood test and they test for cardiac enzymes. And I hear them gathering out in the hallway. Now, I have experience with this sort of phenomenon. The doctors don't have conversations about normal. They're like, hey, have you seen this number? And it's like, oh, I've heard that before. And they're having this confab because they couldn't believe the cardiac enzyme numbers. It was either really high or really, I don't even remember. So they come in, they goes, your car is, I didn't think we were bringing good news because you were talking about it out there and you wouldn't be having a conversation out there if it was normal. You'd give it to a nurse and have her walk it in. So I'd been having a heart attack for about 24 hours. I had 2 100% blockages. So all my friends out there, go get checked. One of them was from the radiation treatment. That was something they were worried about early on, was later in life, you could have cardiac issues. So I had a 100% blockage, but they said it was so old, it had healed, it had rerouted the blood around the blockage. And I said, how does that happen? I didn't know that was possible. He says, it happens, especially if the damage happens when you're younger. And so apparently that would, because I was younger and I'd been there, it was able to, over the years, repair itself. But then I had another one that was completely blocked, and that's what was caused the heart attack. And so I had pretty significant heart damage. It wasn't a heart failure, so you're not rid of me yet. Anybody who's watching this who is hoping that. But he says it wasn't minor. He said, you're in here. My doctor, Dr. Osamani here in Savannah, he's an Illinois grad, so he's an Illini. So we have a jovial, jaunty visit whenever we have our things. And he said, you got to think about it this way. You ever pulled a hamstring? I said, yep. He said, that's what's happened here. We've got to, first, we're going to rest it. So that means no stress, none of this. And I said, well, when can I go back to work? I said, can I go back to work on Monday? And my wife, so they had a confab and they came back in. They basically said, you're not doing this job. So I had to change careers again. So the city council worked with me. They gave me enough time off where we negotiated an exit strategy to where I got a payout so I could sign a release so they don't get sued. Because I think they were worried. It was like, oh my gosh, we gave this guy a heart attack. He's going to sue us. Whatever. We were able to come to an amicable agreement that this is, I think, best for everybody if I just stepped out because I can't be there. I had to be gone for like months because he said, you got to have zero stress. We got to put you on these medications. Don't get your heart rate above this level. We got to heal it, and then we'll start to strengthen it again. You've rehabbed back from a muscle injury. You know how long this is going to take. And so that was the sort of mentality. So it was like, okay, maybe those injuries I had in football might come in handy. You understand. There's a process here. And the one thing I couldn't do is fake my way back in. I said, don't try to fool the trainers on this one. Let it heal. So about the first 4 or 5 months, I really just didn't do much. I just stayed home, kept my head down, negotiated my exit from the city, figured out what I was going to do next. And I had a friend who was a city manager for about 25 years up in the Atlanta region in Texas. He started his own consulting company. And so I called him up and I said, listen, here's what I got going on. I got to find a different way to make money. I'm a consultant now, small company. We do executive recruitment for cities. We find city managers, departments, this sort of thing. But the part I really enjoy is we do general consulting. I'm working with a couple of cities with their finance departments, mapping processes. Brion, I'm using Six Sigma techniques. I haven't been able to get people to buy in fully to the Six Sigma mentality at the local government level yet. I think it's coming. Yeah, as I talked to you earlier, I worked for the city of Atlanta as a interim part of this consulting business where we were analyzing their fleet department in the same way. So that's fun for me. We're getting in there and it's like, okay, where's the itch? We map all the processes and I start to identify hotspots. I say, okay, in my experience, this has been a problem. Is that a problem for you guys? And they're like, yeah, because it just log jams right there. We got to get 3 approvals and they're doing the same thing. And this person, they go out of the system. And so it's fun to figure out what it is and use my expertise, use my degree, put it to good use. So that's been a lot of fun. So that's where I'm at now. So all is well. I haven't even told you about the hip replacement. That's when that happened. That happened several years ago. And the funniest part about that one is it was caused by the prednisone use treatment I had early on years ago. I've had a 23 years ago, I had it done, but they let me keep the old one. Now, granted, this was at the University of Kentucky. You may not be able to get that at most places, but they allowed me to go into pathology and get a bag full of formaldehyde with my old hip in it. I came home and I boiled that sucker and I mounted it on a shillelagh. And so I have it in my closet upstairs. It's a real conversation stopper. So if I ever get the other one done, I might cut it down and make bookends, but I'm not sure. I haven't decided.
We might have to get a photo of that and post it.
I think I could scrounge one up for you.
Okay, gotta see this.
Oh, I was like, nope, you're not taking that. That's mine. And I had suspicions they were trying to build a superhuman or something. They were taking parts of me away.
Wow.
That's incredible. What a ride. So I saw you in Orlando. That was just maybe 6 months after your heart attack.
Yep.
Wow.
It was May
2023.
10th because my wife's birthday was May 12th. And she goes, yeah, thanks. Happy birthday. So that's the sort of thing that you learn as you mature. And so when I was a kid, I was like, oh, this is happening to me. You're not the only one this is happening to. I have three little girls, or they're grown women now. My wife said, this is happening to them. I was trying to be light and funny when they would come into the hospital room and stuff like that. But it's scary to see your dad, tubes coming out of him, and he's like, I'm fine. Well, we're going to be great. They're like, uh-huh. I'm going to talk to the doctor and see what he says. When they see me not getting, you need to go work out, you got to eat right. So they're on me about it. They've been helpful. So that's part of growing up, I think, is you learn that it's not just you, this is happening. Back then, you had to think about your mom and my siblings and my dad and what they were going through. I spent 7.5 weeks in an isolation room in the Iowa City bone marrow unit, 7.5 weeks in a partition room where the airflow, it's called a laminar flow, flowed over me first. And anybody that came in had to be in hazmat suits, basically, mask, fully covered, everything, because I had no immune system for that first part. And this is why it's great to be a Hawkeye, because we go to the bowl games, it's a brotherhood. Guys that come to Savannah or Tybee, they come out and see me. I was like, Ron Gator was out here last year with his wife. They came out and hung out on the beach with us. We were best friends in college. He was a couple years ahead of me. But it was like, he was a Hawkeye. By golly, come on out. Let's go do this. But Coach Fry came by and visited my mom numerous times at the hospital. And a guy, and you're not going to be surprised when I say his name, every single day visited my mom at the hospital. You know, she's an incredible lady. Brought her a newspaper, made sure she had everything she needed. If she needed something, he would go get it. You know who that was? John Streif. Everybody watching this news was like, oh, yeah, I knew you were talking about Streif the moment you started telling. Every day for 7.5 weeks, stopped by the hospital to check on my mom. Now, for the first 2 weeks of my transplant, there were 2 former Hawkins in the transplant unit. Now, I'm not going to say their guy's name because it's a health thing, but there was a point to where every time Coach Fry came by, I couldn't see him because I was too sick. Because the chemo makes, it's not just that dose every week. This is, you were sick. It was, your hair fell out in like the next morning. They gave you so much of it. And so I just couldn't see people. And there was a point to where my fevers were high and I was delirious. But Coach Fry came by and he couldn't come in, but he would stop and talk to my mom. Some of the players would come by and say hello and all that sort of thing. And there was Streefer every damn day. He stopped in, would wave at me on occasion. So I knew he would be there. But my mom told me, oh yeah, he's here every day. I don't know. It was right across the street, but it still meant a lot.
It speaks to the quality of the program, of the people involved, and it's bigger than football and all those things for sure.
It is. And I don't think we got time to get into all of where football's going in the future. I learned very quickly I wasn't an X and O's guy. I just love the contact. I love the challenge of physical impact. That's that. And that's part of the game changing because we're learning about it more. The NIL and the transfer portal are changing the game up. I hope we don't lose that aspect of the game to where you can develop young men and give them the tools they need, because you can't guarantee anybody success in their life, but you certainly can guarantee you're going to bump up against something in your life that you're going to have to bear down and try to overcome. Everybody's going to see that at some point in their life. And part of the training for that is the game. And the program at Iowa, I think, was great and got me ready for it. So
You're still alive. I think that's an incredible story of resilience and fighting through. So how are you doing health-wise today? Feeling good?
Everything's great. I go to the doctor here in June, go back, and I had to change up I had lost a lot of weight, but I was eating a high-fat keto diet, high protein. At one point in 2000, when we moved to Atlanta, I was about 205, 200 pounds. I hadn't weighed that since the 8th grade, but that was hard to maintain. It was a goal I wanted to see how low I could get. But my goal is to get back down about 230. I'm about 260, 258, 260 right now. I need to be back down because poodles live longer than St. Bernards, and I need to get a little leaner. because those big dogs just, the hearts can't keep up. And mine now has been damaged, but it's harder because I had to change my diet. I don't know, haven't quite dialed that in yet. So that's the biggest challenge right now, is figuring that out.
That's your itch right now.
Yeah. Got to scratch that and figure that out and start it. But I got a new job and the world's changing because our girls are all moving out. It's in a new adventure. So, hey, bring it on.
Yeah. All right. We'll attack it like everything else.
That's right.
Really appreciate you coming on. Thanks for sharing your story. I know a lot of that's
Well,
personal, and there's a lot of good lessons.
Been
too
great
there.
stories. Yeah. It's awesome.
I'm honored to be asked to be a part of this. And I was telling you guys, I've watched some of the old videos and I've seen when they come across on LinkedIn and Instagram, I watch them. And so it's humbling to be in that same ilk, but it's that once a Hawkeye, always a Hawkeye sort of scenario. But you guys are doing a great job with this podcast, letting guys come out, kind of tell those stories. Oh, yeah. I remember Coach Triplett telling those stories about the Rose Bowl games and all that stuff. I was like, yeah, I remember that happening. So that was awesome. When you hear those names, we lose touch with guys over the years, but we get our own lives going. But thank you guys for putting us together and let me be a part of it.
Yeah. Thanks for your time and sharing.
Thank
I
you.
think everyone will enjoy the stories. It's going to be great.
Yeah, if anybody down in Savannah, look me up. You can see Hilton Head Island from our beach. So even in Hilton Head, you're not too far away. But stop down and see us if you're in Savannah.
Sounds like a plan.
Thanks, Shawn. Have a good night. Cheers.
All right, guys.
Sounds good. Thanks, Shawn.